Okay, we're ready.
Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Ad-Hoc Inclusion and Educational Justice Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, February 4th, 2026, and the time is 6 o'clock p.m. My name is Sherry McCready Pritchett, Chair of the committee, and joining me tonight is Board Member Mr. Garrett Oliver. And I also have with me tonight Norwalk Public Schools staff, Deputy Superintendent Sandra Fayowitz, and Executive Director of Leadership Development, Mary Ann Shepard. I will entertain a motion to approve the May 7th minutes. However, I go back. First, I will entertain a motion to approve the May 7th, 2025 minutes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. And if there are no revisions or amendments to that, that motion has been passed. And now I will turn it over to staff. Ms. Fayois, I believe you're probably going to make a presentation to us.
Yes, I will be running the presentation, but Mary Ann and I are both going to be presenting
Yep.
to you. Thank you so much, Ms. Pritchett, and thank you so much, Mr. Oliver. Excited to have you on this committee and excited to get this started. I'm going to share. Okay. Please stop us as we go along. And if you have any questions, we thought since this was the first meeting of this year, we were waiting for the committee to actually be reorganized. We thought that it would be a good grounding time for us, sharing some of the updates that on the work so far and bringing you a little bit back in history and up to today, and then looking ahead to some of the strategies that we have in play. And we hope that you will find this useful and it can set the direction for the next meeting. I'm not sure if you are familiar with our vision statement, but we always ground everything that we do in the vision of the district. And this is the vision that we share with everything that we do in all our presentations. And that is that Norwalk Public Schools is building a more equitable and just world where each and every Norwalk student is prepared for all aspects of life. This is the vision overall, and equity is at the heart of our vision and at the heart of our work. In 2020, there was an equity audit that was conducted, and it's linked below in this slide. But I believe it was in 2022 there was an equity statement that was adopted by the Board of Education. And the equity statement just reaffirms our commitment to equity, but I will take just a brief moment to read through it excuse me, I apologize, so that everybody can be familiar. The Norwalk Board of Education firmly believes in the potential of all students to learn and succeed. We support equity, diversity, and inclusion as fundamental values of our school district to ensure access for all scholars. We stand united in respecting people of all backgrounds and identities, welcoming all races, socioeconomic statuses, genders, gender identities or expressions, sexual orientations, religions, nationalities, citizenship statuses, and disabilities. Our schools are safe and welcoming environments for all. We are dedicated to fostering authentic relationships with all members of our community, including culturally diverse families, and will communicate with clarity and respect. To prepare our students to succeed in a multicultural global society, we support our schools in teaching the contributions and viewpoints of all people using culturally relevant curricula. Race, ethnicity, language, or socioeconomic status will not be the barriers to accessing academic, social, emotional, extracurricular opportunities. The board believes that high-quality school district provides equitable opportunities, policies, facilities, and experiences that produce meaningful outcomes for all scholars. So this has been the statement that we live to actually put into every single thing that we do. And as you can see, it spans from the facilities that our children learn in to the curricula that we use as our resource. Given this, we wanted to just point out that there have been major improvements, and it's due to us having a collective impact is how I like to phrase it. And one of the things that we pay attention very closely to is chronic absenteeism or absenteeism. The reason why absenteeism becomes a good test for how well a district is doing, it's because it's often symptomatic of various things. So absenteeism could be an indicator when a school culture is not going well. Absenteeism is an indicator if a family is not doing well. And so because of that, we pay close attention to it. But we particularly pay attention to our chronic absenteeism numbers because our Black and Brown students tend to be disproportionately represented in our
Sandra,
yes.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Howard said he's trying to jump on and he's not able to get on. So if our tech person, he said that it's just waiting for him to be allowed in. So I don't know if he has
Oh,
to do
thank
something on
you.
that end. Yeah, thank
Felix,
you.
are you able to allow anybody in that's waiting?
Yeah, Howard said, because he just called me, he said he's trying to get in.
He's not in the waiting room currently, from
Huh,
what I could see.
hold on, let me keep going. And
Okay, thank you. And so as you could see, we've made a lot of effort in trying to move our chronic absenteeism numbers. You will see that at the height post-pandemic, we have decreased our absenteeism by 33%. So at the height, we were really experiencing incredible chronic absenteeism numbers. Garrett, I'm not sure if you understand like what makes a person chronically absent. Do you know the distinction between like truancy and chronic absenteeism?
Is it like 18 days or something like that?
Yeah, it,
Yeah.
it, it amounts to about 18 days by the end of the school year, but it's 10%. If you are absent more than 10% of the total days in like in attendance. So for instance, if we're at day 100, but you've been out 10 days, then you're chronically absent. And then 18, it's obviously because it's due to the 180 days. So the reason why we track chronic absenteeism, it's because there's a lot of research that's tied to chronic absenteeism and a student's ability to achieve certain benchmark goals, like being able to read by third grade, being able to be on track by the end of grade 9, and then ultimately being able to graduate. So we pay a lot of attention to this because it means that these students are missing a lot of school and will ultimately have a lot of gaps in their learning. And unfortunately, Black and Brown students make up the bulk of these students. Sherry, I'm sorry, are you okay with me continuing? Yes, okay. So not only do we track chronic absenteeism by district-wide, we look at it high school versus elementary school versus middle school, but then we look at it in terms of race and ethnicity. And we look at it in terms of the MLL versus special students receiving special education services. We look at it in a number of ways. But what you can see is that in our equity efforts, everybody has declined. Now, this doesn't mean that there are still not disparities between our Black or African American students, Hispanic students, and then our white students. You could see that the chronic absenteeism numbers for our white students is much lower than that of our Black and Hispanic students. What is good for us is that it's going down, and we hope at some point to close that gap. But the efforts that the schools are putting in obviously are making these students either feel like they belong in these schools, giving them those added supports, or giving those families those added supports. And today we just talked about it during our leadership meeting also. So chronic absenteeism is one of the data points that we pay a lot of attention to. Another one that we pay a lot of attention to, and this has been a success for us because of our collective impact, is students receiving discipline because of incidents. So our incident data. The reason why we pay attention to our incident data, it's really because of, the old saying that the road to prison oftentimes starts with suspension and expulsion in schools. And so we want to make sure that we are calling out those disparities. So if Black boys are overrepresented in that data, we want to pay attention to that data. And we want to make sure that we're addressing whatever it is or trying to get at the root cause of why that is occurring within our district. And so we do this with schools. We look at the type of incidents that there are, why Black boys, which is the group that is the most disproportionately represented or impacted, why it's happening, where it's happening, by whom the incidents are happening, and what sorts of labels are placed. So we try to eliminate students being punished for things that another student may not necessarily be punished for. And so one of the things that we did probably 3 or 4 years ago is, in order for us to reduce the number of students that were being placed out of school through expulsion or through suspension, is every school has to actually request the ability to suspend a student. So we at central office take that on within our office. A school would say, Garrett got into a fight. These are all of the signs that we saw that this was going to happen, or maybe not, maybe it was a total surprise. These are their interventions. This is who we've called. And then we say to them, sometimes by law, we have to suspend. There are laws that, like, if you've brought a weapon to school, you're automatically suspended. But when there are these gray areas, we basically say, is Garrett a danger to be in school? Could in-school suspension be the consequence for this? And so then there's that conversation that takes place between our school safety and preparedness officers and the school principal. And oftentimes, the school, when they feel very strongly that there's been a violation of the law, then that student will go to an out-of-school suspension and attend an out-of-school suspension at the suspension site, because we also don't want them to just go home because we think that that's just sort of a day off. Or the student will have to go to a hearing and be expelled. But what's been remarkable is that at one point, this district, as you could see in 2016, 2017, had been flagged by the state for over suspending our Black boys. We have come down since then 57%. As you could see, since the time that Dr. Estrella has been, or post-pandemic, excuse me, we continue to decline. We're still disproportionately represented in that data. Black boys are still suspended at a higher rate as it relates to our population. But the numbers do continue to decrease, and that is not through just us intervening at the suspension request, but also I think that our equity work has something to do with us addressing anti-bias. And Marianne will talk about that in a bit. Marianne, do you want to talk about the graduation rates?
Sure. Good evening, board members. Nice to see you both. I really like the way Sandra frames these particular data points as like these collective impact data points, because the progress and the growth that you're seeing is really a result of like a collective effort across many, many roles and people, as well as making sure that the system structures and practices are really functioning together as well. And so the graduation rate is obviously a data point that we pay very close attention to. Here you can see the 4-year graduation rate for our Black students in that blue line and our Hispanic students in that orange line. In that blue line, you can see there was a low in the 4-year graduation rate in the spring of 2020. But since then, both groups of students have seen a strong, steady, sustainable increase in those graduation rates. So Black student graduation rates have increased 5% from 23 to 24 and have increased a total of 18% from that low point in 2020. The Hispanic students, on the other hand, have increased 1% from the spring of 23 to the spring of 24, with an overall increase of 9% from that low in 2020. And, again, the multiple things feed into our 4-year graduation rate, from the foundation that's built in our elementary schools and middle schools to how we track our students in 9th grade. Are they on track? To thinking about course pass rates all along. We do these dipsticks to make sure that students are meeting the benchmarks that they need to be able to be achieving their graduation within the 4 years. And so on the next slide, you'll see another group of students that we pay close attention to is the MLL graduation rate. You'll see a similar trend in that low point in the spring of 2020. But again, since then, you've seen this steady improvement in that graduation rate, with a really stark improvement from the spring of 2023 to 2024 of 12%. And when you look from that low point in 2020, an overall improvement of 28%. And again, this collective impact, multiple contributing factors, multiple contributing roles to this really great work that's happening in our schools. So part of our work in planning for this current school year, we planted the seeds for it last year and really kind of committed to it for this school year, is focusing on belonging. We know our students and our staff will feel a sense of belonging if they feel seen, valued, and heard. And I'm not saying like we just started focusing on, cultivating a sense of belonging. This is something our schools have been doing for a number of years, as well as the district. But what the shift was is that we really made this commitment to this work and made it our overarching equity framework. Sandra often talks about, it's like we put kind of all of our efforts into this because we believe it will have a huge impact on a lot of those data points that we just talked about, but more importantly, just how our students feel and the success and the benchmarks that they're able to meet. On the next slide, there's a link down at the bottom to a research document that came out about 1.5 years ago from TNTP. And they studied schools that when students fall behind, they are able to catch them up. And this is only about 5% of schools across the country. And they called this group of schools trajectory changing schools. And so our goal is to be a trajectory changing district. And what the research report came out and shared is that there were 3 characteristics shared by these trajectory changing schools. Consistency, so access to high quality education, regardless of what school you're enrolled in, regardless of what classroom you're in. Coherence, that what you were learning in the classroom and supports that you might be receiving in other places are coherent and aligned. And lastly, that students felt a sense of belonging. So this belonging is not just something that's nice or something that, it would feel good if we had it. It's absolutely a prerequisite for learning. There's neuroscience behind it. There's emotional aspect, social emotional aspect to this, that without feeling that sense of belonging, you're not going to be able to fully maximize your potential and to be able to live up to everything that you're able to. And one of the quotes I love from the report is it talks about belonging takes more than just warm relationships. And we can't leave it up to chance. It's created by intentional policies, practices, and systems that respect students' identities, recognize their agency, and affirm their ability to succeed. Next slide. So given that we made the commitment to this belonging work and it's the foundation of our equity work, it's our equity framework, this is our theory of action. So we believe that if we explicitly prioritize equity by ensuring that every school adopts and enacts goals focused on increasing student engagement and belonging for student groups who have been historically underserved, such as students of color, students with disabilities, multilingual learners, and those disproportionately represented in discipline and achievement data. So our first step is we wanted our schools, as part of their school improvement plan, to have a goal that was focused on this student engagement and belonging work. And then the next part of our theory of action, and if we provide targeted professional learning or development in culturally responsive teaching, implicit bias, and relationship-centered practices, and then also if school environments are actively shaped by inclusive practices, culturally affirming curriculum, student voice opportunities, and restorative practices. So if we do everything in those top 3 bullets, and those top 3 bullets have been the guiding principles of our work, then that last statement, these students will experience stronger relationships, greater connections to their schools, and an increased sense of psychological safety, which will lead to higher levels of academic performance, improved attendance and participation, and enhanced emotional well-being. So when we're thinking about that first part, we're setting goals, we're looking at data to monitor our progress, to identify where we are achieving success and where we need to continually to make adjustments. We are looking at data with an equity lens. And so what do we mean by that? The first thing is we're using data to empower and elevate voices from traditionally marginalized groups. So I can tell you, an example. I'm in a cycle of school visits right now, and I'm conducting a focus group with students at each school. And so the schools are identifying students to be in that focus group that are reflective of the diversity of the school. And these conversations provide us with really, really powerful qualitative data. And why that's so important is when we're looking at the numbers, the quantitative data, that only tells us one part of the story. If we're not gathering information and insights from our students, we don't get that more holistic understanding of what the student experience is like. And I'll tell you, the experience from these focus groups are really rich and provide really powerful information, both to me, from a district standpoint, but I also share that with the principals as part of the visit. The second part, when we talk about looking at data with an equity lens, we don't hide behind the fact that there are inequalities. We lead with the data culture. So that's key. That's the data. So here's the data. We can see it. You can see it. So now we talk about, so what is it that we need to do about it? We're always examining participation rates and then disaggregating the data by student groups so that we can see, are we seeing particular subgroups performing at a higher rate than others, so that we know that it's not necessarily our response needs to be across the board, but sometimes it needs to be a little bit more targeted. Inviting stakeholders to review the data. So we know data should not live with just a small group of people, but needs to be what grounds and informs all of our work. And, as I kind of mentioned, and I think Sandra also mentioned, that the data is what helps us to identify the next level of work.
So some of our data that we just wanted to point out to you, this is from the Panorama survey, and the SEL trends were what we used as the basis for some of this work that we actually based our theory of action on. And what we're trying to demonstrate here is not so much the growth. Sometimes we're trying to demonstrate that we're not making growth and we're just kind of remaining a little stagnant. And so what we're seeing in this, the way that they measure it is by percent of favorable. So you can land on two things. It has to be like a 5 or a 4 in order for it to be favorable. If you're kind of neutral, it doesn't count. It doesn't count in terms of the percent of favorable. And what we're showing here is that students get asked questions about their growth mindset. So their growth mindset is their ability or their belief in themselves to be able to learn new things, do things that are difficult. And usually a child's potential or their growth mindset is not only comes from their home, but it also comes from the messages that they're receiving in school. And so we're very interested in what children are, young people, they're not all children, young people are thinking about themselves as far as their ability to learn and what those messages are. The other piece that we look at is their ability to self-regulate and their emotional regulation. And I'll show you some examples of some questions coming up. But if you look in grades for the growth mindset, in grades 3 to 5, we have about 60 to 63% favorable. But the flip side of that is that we have 37% that's not responding like this, or 39% that's not responding like this. So what we're able to do is actually sparse out that data and look at which students are not responding in this way. Are we looking for patterns? And what is it that is happening? You will see that dip from elementary school to the secondary. That's very common in terms of the national trends, that students, as they get older, start to feel worse about their own growth and feeling like they maybe can't do things that are new, or things that are challenging. And then maybe the messaging that they're receiving also as they get older starts to impact them in a greater way. Our elementary school students tend to answer much more favorably across the board. So that also makes us think about, what are we doing in our secondary level to be able to support students and try to not have that dip. And you see it right from 5th grade right into 6th grade. And so then everybody else does too. If you look at emotional regulation, which is a student's ability to calm themselves down, to remain centered, to remain focused, all of the various things that actually you have to be able to do in order to access your learning, you will see that students are responding. About half of them in elementary school are saying that they don't find that they're able to regulate themselves emotionally in the way that we would want them to be able to do and have the tools to be able to do. And that actually gets a little bit worse in the secondary schools, but they're much more like each other in between the elementary to the secondary schools. But it's very telling of what our students are going through. So if you look at some of the questions, and we have made some improvements. That's what those little arrows going up are. But if you look at, things like, how often are you able to pull yourself out of a bad mood? Or how often are you able to control your emotions when you need to? And the reason why we look at this, it's again back to those needs of a child being able to feel safe, to then be open to maximizing their learning. And if we don't address these pieces, and if we don't start to look at these pieces within our students, and this, again, it's not to say that we're just now doing this. We've actually had a pretty robust social emotional curriculum and strategy post-COVID. But we're noticing that students are still struggling with some of this. And so then we thought, belonging is really what we're going to thread to make sure that not only are we addressing their social emotional learning, but also addressing these disparities, which you'll see in the next slide. If you look over here for grades 6 through 12, we do have some declines from the previous year. The one that we saw that had declined by 4 points is, how often are you able to control your emotions when you need to? And so our young people are telling us, even though that's a higher rating than everybody else, it makes us wonder what happened from one year to the next, where we start to see some of these. We've made some gains, and then in other places, we start to see some of these slips. We then sparse out, or we parse out this information, or we disaggregate it by ethnicity. And you will see that there is, again, that persistent gap between our Black Hispanic students in terms of how favorable they feel that they are able to regulate their emotions compared to our white students. And again, in the secondary level also. So not as much at the secondary level, the gap is less, but definitely the gap is a little greater in the elementary schools. And this is the type of data that we show schools all the time. We go over it as a district, and then we go over it with each individual school so that they're looking at their specific data. Marianne, I was thinking, do you want to talk about school improvements plans?
Do I ever?
Okay, please.
Sure. So you've heard us talk about the school improvement plan process before. And so it starts in the spring for the upcoming school year. We start to work with the schools to start looking at various data points. It's a pretty robust needs assessment that they conduct during the spring and into the summer with their leadership teams. And as they're looking at that data, they're really framing the problem. Like, what is the problem that we're identifying in our data that we need to develop a goal to work on? And so currently the school improvement plans have 4 goals that each school sets. They set an English language arts goal, a math goal, an equity goal, and then an additional school priority. And that was revised a few years ago because different schools, their data shows them different things, and we wanted to allow some greater flexibility for schools to identify what would be the most high leverage 4th goal for them to focus on. And as they're doing that needs assessment, they're really digging into the data and asking hard questions to do that root cause analysis. Because as we're looking at the data and going to be mapping out a whole plan to work towards that goal, we want to make sure that we're addressing the root cause, but not the symptom. And I can give an example. At one point there was a school that wanted to map out a goal focusing on their intervention data because they saw that their interventions weren't having the impact that they had hoped for. And so, but as they engaged in that root cause analysis, they actually saw the students that weren't growing from the interventions were chronically absent. So if they hadn't done that root cause analysis, they might have done all of these plans and efforts to focus on intervention, which wasn't going to address the root cause of why that group of students wasn't making progress. And so that root cause analysis is really important because we want to make sure we're being as strategic and intentional as we map out those school improvement plans. So this year, with that equity goal, they create an action plan that leverages the equity lead. So every single school in our district has an equity lead. And these equity leads are not one particular position in our school. So an equity lead could be a principal, could be an assistant principal, could be a school counselor, a dean of students, a teacher, and we have a variety of teachers. And so when we come together with these equity leads, it's a variety of role in the room, but I think that that variety of roles actually makes that kind of professional learning community even stronger. And the goal is that equity lead is somebody that we're investing in to help invest in the equity team back at the school. And so we're providing coaching both to the equity lead and to some of our equity teams. And then with all of our school improvement plans, there's progress monitoring, because anytime we set a goal or a school improvement plan, we don't want to wait until the end of the year to know if we met our goal or not. So we have formal progress monitoring moments that, in the middle of the year, but we also have informal progress monitoring that takes place throughout the whole year. And that progress monitoring isn't just about saying, yes, you met it or no, you didn't, but it's, if you're on track, wonderful. Why do you think you're on track? Let's keep doing that. What adjustments might you make to even accelerate progress even more? Or if you're not on track, well, let's unpack that. Let's figure out why your interventions or your steps aren't having the desired impact, so we can make those just-in-time adjustments so that ultimately by the end of the year we can make those goals. And so that progress monitoring happens through data visits, school visits conducted by myself as well as other members of the district team. We do check-ins with our equity leads during the equity lead meetings, and then also through the coaching visits. Which brings me to the next. So to support that work that you just heard me describe in these SIP equity goals, we've been partnering with Paul Forbes. This is now the 2nd year. You've both had the opportunity to meet with him. So Paul Forbes is from the organization Leading with Hearts and Minds. And he talks about how his work is the work behind the work. So you heard me talk a lot about the data work and the school improvement plan. But underneath all of that, we have to do that culturally responsive work. We have to think about implicit bias and how is it showing up in the organization. We need to think about what are the relationship-centered practices that are going to help our students feel a sense of belonging. And so our work with Paul Forbes is really grounded in building the capacity of our equity leads, our equity teams, and those SIP equity goals. And here you see two great pictures of one of our equity lead meetings. This was actually the first one, I believe, over at Narragansett. And so in those meetings, we engage in a lot of learning, a lot of sharing, a lot of action planning. Sandra, if you can go to the next slide, please. And as I mentioned, every school has an equity goal, an equity team, and an equity lead. And we come together with those equity leads for quarterly meetings. So we actually have our third session next Tuesday. And these are sessions that Sandra, myself, and Paul work very hard to plan and to collaboratively facilitate them, because we want to be modeling for our schools like that this is a joint collective effort and that we're all committed to this work. We have identified a cohort of schools to receive individualized coaching from Paul Forbes, which is exciting, to help them with the implementation of their equity goal. And I think, a strategy that we've been using this year to really share excellence as well as to share promising practices is each one teach one. And this is during our principal and assistant principal meetings where we're having different schools share a promising practice. So at the January principal and AP meeting, we had 5 different schools share their equity goal work and the progress that they have been making, the things that they have been putting into place. And what was really exciting is during the principal and the AP meetings, we invited the equity leads to come in and join, and they presented alongside their principals. So again, it's a collective effort, sharing an impactful strategy so that other schools can learn. And I shared with Sandra, I think it was just last week, as I've been engaging in school visits during the month of January, it is so exciting just to hear how the seeds were planted by their colleagues. When a principal is telling me, oh, I'm pulling this practice that I learned from Brookside, or, oh, we're trying the strategy that I heard CMS speak to. So hearing just, this community that's being built, we're all in this together. We're all trying, the work might look a little different in different schools, but we're all in this together and we can all learn with and from each other.
It took a while to get here also. I think that Sherry can attest to sort of the slow and steady, but we're slow and steady getting there. But it took a while for us to actually be in a system where we can say that there's an equity lead at each school, that these equity teams that are coming together. And so I'm really proud of that work. And Paul has been instrumental in that. Another partner that we have had is Dr. Eddie Fergus. Dr. Eddie Fergus presented to you, Garrett, remember when you were onboarding, and he's presented to the board quite a few times. And what Dr. Fergus's team does is Dr. Fergus first conducted the equity audit that I linked into the presentation and that we use quite frequently. We're re-engaging in another equity audit. And what we're able to do is when we do this is we can evaluate our progress. So it's been now, I believe the last one was in 2020 when he initially did the equity audit. So now we'll be able to actually measure the impact, kind of like that collective impact that we've been talking about. And he started he came to our school leaders meeting in December and set the first set of interviews with our school leaders. And now he is meeting with each individual school. He's trying to identify where the gaps are, trying to tell us where the progress has been made. But he's also doing something else that I thought was really interesting, which is he's trying to also assess each school leader's growth as equity leaders. And he's trying to do this, or he thinks that he can achieve this by looking at their school improvement plans over time, the implementation of those plans, and just how they talk about the monitoring and the progress of their equity action plans through their interviews. He also provides coaching to 2 different schools. We took a little bit of a different turn at the end in the spring last year, where we sort of shopped out this coaching model. So we didn't impose coaching on anyone, but we said, who would like to have a coach? Some we develop those relationships with, to say like it would probably be really good if you had a coach because your equity team hasn't galvanized in the way that you would have wanted. But so then 2 schools are partnered with Dr. Fergus, and then we have the 6 schools that are partnered with Paul Forbes. So Dr. Fergus has had a long-standing relationship with these 2 schools, and they wanted to stay in that partnership with Dr. Fergus and his team. And what
One quick
Oh,
question
please.
for you.
Yes.
So, how often are you changing out who's in the executive leadership role at the schools?
The equity teams?
Yes.
Well, we had quite a few people return. Marianne, do you want to talk about that, the difference between last year and this year?
Sure. So this is the second year that we've had this
Mhm.
equity lead role in place. I would say, I don't have the exact number, but I would say at least 2/3 returned.
Yeah.
Sandra, does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that we have a couple of people that returned but are at a different school now, but they returned nonetheless in that role. And then a couple of new people, but yes.
And we were grateful to have that because it allowed
Mhm.
us to build upon the work from last year versus having like a fresh starting point. Some schools did make an adjustment to the person who was in that role, and that was done for like a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And I kind of figured that. I was just wondering in regards to the continuity going through this,
Yeah.
having someone who's returning for that. So that's a good thing.
Mhm.
Yes. And we do believe that, and the meetings are well attended. People come. I mean, it's really wonderful. We don't have people that aren't responding. They are taking the role and they're running with it. And it's because of this belonging piece also, that entry point of belonging allows them to use language that they're also very familiar with. And then we say, like, how is it that you're layering this equity piece into that belonging piece? Let's look at the data and let's look at who's impacted and where those disparities are. So I really do feel that it's been like a much more accessible entry point for those equity leads. And a lot of them, it's their second year in, so they have a lot more tools in their belt in terms of speaking about equity and talking to others about the work that they're engaging in. And then we started last year talking about a cohort for the grading for equity in the Crescendo group, and we had the author, Dr. Joe Feldman, came this summer and gave a professional development for our school leaders. From that professional development, just on overall the history of grading inequities and really trying to get at that last frontier, because grading tends to be very personal. It's very subjective, but it's incredibly personal. So getting teachers to talk about their grading practices oftentimes puts teachers on a defense. So Joe Feldman has written a book on this. He is a celebrated author. He came here all the way from San Francisco to lead this PD. And then from there, we got 2 cohorts from West Rocks and from Rhoton. So there are 9 people from each school, so a total of 18, plus one of the assistant principals over at West Rocks that are engaged in this action research project. And so the first year of grading for equity, it's them really understanding how we can start to grade more equitable. They do a project where they implement like 1 strategy or 2 strategies. They have personal coach and they do those sessions. They're halfway through the program, I think, at this point. And then we will have a presentation at the end, and I'll keep you posted on how that's going. But from what I hear from Dr. Smith, who is the person that's leading our group, it's been a really, really good experience because it is a really tough thing to tackle. And then we do our programs where we also have affinity groups, and we're deliberate about creating these affinity groups for students that are overrepresented in some of this data that can be detrimental to their education progress or to their academic progress. So the My Brother's Keeper and the My Sister's Keeper program targeted Black and Brown students and provided mentorship for those Black and Brown students with mentors that are in their school. And the reason is so that they actually have that trusted adult inside the school. And we do several things with them to give them that affinity group and give them that place of belonging within that affinity group. The MBK MSK is not unique to Norwalk. It's actually a program that was started by President Barack Obama back in 2014. And we brought it to NPS. Dr. Estrella actually brought it to NPS in 2022, and we've had it ever since. Currently, we have a little bit over 100 students for My Brother's Keeper, a little bit over 100 students. I think it's like 108 for My Sister's Keeper. And they have these monthly convenings with mentors. And for both My Brother's Keeper and My Sister's Keeper, we have about 20 mentors. And it's from grade 6 to 12. Each school right now is represented, which is also another accomplishment. I think at first, some school leaders were reluctant to release students from instructional time to attend these meetings, but they have these monthly meetings, and then they have weekly check-ins with their mentor. And our current focus is actually to enhance the mentor's ability to put in some strategies that are research-based and that have been found to be effective for the mentorship program. So we've started to not only invest in the students as mentees, but we've started to invest in the adults that are spending time with these students. And this year was the second retreat that we've had with them, and they've been really appreciative. The group is led by two of our African-American APs. One is LaShante James, and the other one is Mr. Kadir Abdul Salam. And one of them is at P-Tech and the other one is at Brian McMahon. But that's also really wonderful to have them be on the grounds with everybody doing the work and be co-leading this work. And the theory of action for My Brother's Keeper, My Sister's Keeper is that through relationship building, mentorship, and curricula that focuses on Black excellence, students will develop stronger academic identities, cultural competence, critical consciousness, and positive connection with others. These are some photos from the retreat that they do at the beginning of the year. They actually go into a cabin-like environment and do team building. And I will tell you something that we found. I'll leave these up. I'm not going to read these. These are some of the quotes from the students, but I'll tell you something that we found curious when we were tracking their data last year. We would look at their data and we do surveys for the students all the time. And in their data, they would indicate that they feel a great sense of belonging, that they feel like they are cared for. But then in their panorama data, they were part of the group that was answering unfavorably when it comes to their relationships at school or their self-regulation. And so then we were seeing this disconnect between how they were responding in their panorama data and how they were responding in our own survey, which is the importance of knowing what it is that you're asking and when. When we spoke to the students about why is there this disparity between their responses on a panorama data versus their responses to a survey that is uniquely about MBK or MSK, it's because they viewed the panorama survey as a survey about their experience in school overall, versus the survey for MBK MSK, they felt that it was unique to their experience in the program. So this year, part of our goal was to get students to not only have a positive experience while they're in MBK and MSK within their affinity group, but also have them have a leadership goal that was outside of MBK or MSK. And it could look like anything. It could look like you were going to join student council. You were going to participate in a school play. You are going to take up some other advocacy at the school, no matter what that is. So each student actually made a goal for themselves that they would do something outside of MBK, MSK that contributed to their school community in some way. So I'll let you know how that data goes because we're at the mid-year point, so we haven't checked in with them. But we do recognize that we want the skills that they are learning in MBK and MSK to transfer to other aspects of their academic and their school life. And these are some of the quotes, because we bring in speakers for the students, so they talk a lot about the importance of having people around you that are of the same ethnic group or that look like you. And looking ahead, Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things we have coming up?
Sure. So we are currently gathering a lot of mid-year data, and that mid-year data, aligned to their school improvement plan goals. Some of the data points that schools are looking at as part of their equity goal could be their chronic absenteeism data. It could be the panorama survey, which will be administered in March. Some schools do like a kind of a mini mock, a shortened version of the panorama survey, just around a few of the questions in like December, early January, so they can kind of get a dipstick into like the progress that they're making. I mentioned we have our third equity lead meeting coming up on Tuesday. And Sandra, you want to talk about the remaining ones?
Sure. I think a lot of them we've touched upon. And again, we're planning maybe an end of the year retreat for our MBK, MSK mentors to check in on the goals that they made at the beginning of the year. And then the Rutgers team will also share some data from their audit by the end of the year. But so far, we've remained steady in the course that we set out during last spring. And I do feel that it's made us a lot more coherent in our equity effort. But that's all that we have for you today, and we're open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fayos and Ms. Shepherd, for that very robust and comprehensive update and review. I appreciate that. Do you have any questions, Garrett, or any comments?
Well, no, that was actually pretty straightforward, and I appreciate you taking the time.
What I would say is maybe you ladies can kind of give us a sense of what it used to be like in the district. This is, for me, the first time that there has been deliberate work on addressing the equity issue. So, for instance, you might want to talk a little bit about the disproportionality with Black and Brown kids in academically talented programs and how that is being managed now.
We will tackle I can definitely tackle what it used to be like here because I've been here for quite a long time.
Yes.
I mean, I think before that, we just accepted that disproportionality was just part of our education system. And there's some learned helplessness and acceptance of these gaps, right? So there is these achievement gaps, and we sort of would gaze at the gap, but there wasn't any deliberate root cause analysis. So we would even if you share the data, it goes beyond just sharing the data. It has to be like, what are we going to do about this data that we see? And then really be thoughtful. So the example that you brought up, Sherry, like one of the things is that access to AP courses or high-level courses was something that Dr. Fergus's audit demonstrated that that there were great disproportionalities based on who was actually accessing these high-level courses. And then one of the things that had to be deconstructed, it's w- not just why are students not accessing these courses, right? But also, what are the things that the system has in place that is impeding these students from even being able to qualify for some of these courses? So then you have to not only look at the course, the program of study at the high school, but how are we setting them up for success in middle school? And then how is it that one of the things, it's identification for gifted was something that we tackled a long time ago, because the identification for gifted and talented used to occur in the second grade. Okay. It occurred in the second grade with something that we used to use. One of the assessments that we used to use was called the ORF, which is the Oral Language Fluency Assessment. And the Oral Language Fluency Assessment used to take a child, you read a passage to them, and then the child is supposed to repeat back to you like 5 key main points or something like that. And so then a lot of our students that either English was not their first language, or students who maybe did not follow the same sort of response, the call and response that was expected, that would give you those rules. I mean, that would give you those points, will not qualify. We had a lot of training at some point on just how the bias that existed in that type of assessment, that a person would be reading a passage, and that if you somehow couldn't like regurgitate back some of the passages, that somehow that kept you out of a gifted class. So let's just say that started in second grade. In second grade, you were then tracked in third grade to receive gifted. That's why we used to do it in second grade. So in third grade, you get gifted. You qualify for the gifted program. You now have access to a whole nother teacher. You have access to enrichment work. You have access to certain science projects or things like that. When you go to sixth grade, you're entering a certain level of math, and now you're already tracked. So we were tracking students starting at the end of second grade, if you could imagine. And unknowingly, because you're just saying it's just gifted. But then if you look, in sixth grade, those students are all taking math together. By eighth grade, those students are taking pre-algebra, right? So they're taking pre-algebra in eighth grade, which means in ninth grade, you're already setting yourself up to be able to get on that AP track. And so it was really about dismantling the system. And why is it? So that's an example for like the AP courses. It's, you look at this data, and it's not just about the high school saying, we're going to encourage more Black and brown students to take these classes, which was not happening either. Okay, let's just be very clear about that. But it wasn't just about that. It's about like, how do we ensure that these students can successfully access and be able to compete in that environment? How do we make them feel like they actually even belong in that environment, but also that they have the skills to be able to do that? So that all was, I've been here, and that all was here since I've been here. And I've been here 13 years now. So not that long ago, but it's not that long ago. And that's just one example of how the system was actually creating these conditions for these disparities. Marianne, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or about something else.
Well, I think that example that you just provided speaks to that it wasn't necessarily an achievement gap, but there was an opportunity gap, right? And so there was an opportunity being provided to some students, but not to others, that then set a trajectory. And I think with the access to accelerated learning, what's been really exciting to see when individual schools have worked on increasing access to honors, gifted and talented, accelerated math, but the conversation in some place has all become K-12. And what I mean by that is like the high school is reaching out to the middle school. How can we work on how we're bridging students from eighth grade to ninth grade? Middle schools, how are we bridging students from fifth grade to sixth grade? Because the receiving schools are sharing the patterns that they're noticing in who's being recommended for classes, and thinking about, I want to think about what I can do once the students are in my school, but I also want to reach out and see what we can do even earlier.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think just the other thing I would add is also just building new learning, right? And bringing
Yeah.
awareness to some of these things. Thinking about when we're using language that's really deficit oriented versus asset, really thinking about the assets. And so then what are the system structures and practices we need to shift? And sometimes it can be as simple as if a group of staff are coming together to talk about a student that they're, experiencing some challenges with, let's start and just talk about the student strengths. That's where we're going to start the meeting. We're going to talk about the student strengths, areas of progress, and then we're going to, think about like how can we best support that student with those challenges that they're experiencing.
Yeah. And
Howard did say he's on, but he's on in a way that it's not allowing him to speak. So he might just be in one of the, one of the
oh, he
versions.
must,
So
okay. Well,
he says he can see us, but or hear us, but it's not allowing him to speak.
does he have any questions?
Let me ask him.
Is he the
And the reason
participant
why I
with
asked that
iPhone?
question, because
I'm
I wanted
sorry?
to,
Mm-hmm.
Is he on his
Right.
iPhone?
let's see.
Because if he is, I could let him speak right now.
Yeah, he
It
said he
just
does have
labeled
questions.
iPhone. That's the only other participant I see.
So I'll have him, maybe just have him call me.
But if he's on as an
Is he on
iPhone,
on his phone? Because maybe that's who's listening, is
Let me
what
see.
Felix is saying.
Are
Okay.
you on? He's calling me now.
Okay.
Howard, are you on your phone?
Yes, I just called you.
Okay.
You had me call me.
Okay, so listen so what's your question? I've got your phone. You're on speaker.
I noticed from the discipline level, which is great, we have a low number as far as the discipline. What's the change? What happened?
Okay.
Is it to the program?
Two things happen. So, and it comes down a lot to the technical things that we've put in place, and then also some growth that we've had. And I'll tell you about the adaptive changes. So some of the technical things that we put in place, Mr. White, is that schools have to request approval for all out-of-school suspensions. And what that's allowed us to do is, for instance, it has allowed us to say to schools, what happened? What are the interventions? And the schools have had to conduct investigations. So previously, what I surmise is that an incident would happen and the school would react, and the school would say, these kids were in a fight, right? And that's something that's very clear cut, and we want them suspended. And oftentimes that was just happening. It was happening at the school, and it was really difficult for us to assess, like, well, did an investigation occur? Is there a report? So some of those systems were missing. Some of those systems were put in place, actually, since I've been in that position. And so then, and the other piece, that approval piece, just made sure that other systems were being followed. Were the parents called? Did the parents have a conversation with the teacher or with the security person or whoever broke it up? So we've just put in the steps that should have been happening all along. We really just created the accountability for it. That's one piece that I feel happened, and it sort of stopped the bleeding if you're like triaging something, right? So it really just kind of halted everything, because now schools understood that we were going to be requesting all of this data from them and all of these incident reports. That was one piece that happened. Yes.
Sandra, just kind of quick, kind of building off of that. So just for my clarification, was it that the systems weren't in place, or that the steps weren't being followed within the system, or a combination thereof?
I think a combination, because I think that people could boast and point to a piece of paper that says, well, no, we require them to have an investigation. But if no one actually is checking that an investigation has occurred and asked, like, well, what are your findings from the investigation? Is it in writing? Has it been entered in Power School, which is where we keep our student information system? So I think that having all of those checkpoints, like have you entered this information in Power School? Have the parents been notified? Making sure that the student's due process is actually being followed. So that I believe has been the first set of why we saw a decline. That was the first set. The second thing that we started to notice when it came to the way that we were disaggregating the data is why students were being disciplined, like the reason for why students were being disciplined. So we started to look at why white students were being disciplined versus why Black students were being disciplined versus why Hispanic students, and really just picking it apart and looking at where were students being disciplined that was adult and child conflict versus child and child conflict, because an adult who may be biased may look at a group of Black boys running down the hall. They could call that a disruption, and they will call it insubordination if those children, if those young men or whatever age they are, don't stop. But then we started to notice that if the same group of kids, non-Black kids, like white kids or girls get away with a lot. You know, if they're running down the hall, they don't get that same reaction. Like they don't get that same elevated response from the adult. So a school like West Rocks is a good example where when they're doing their analysis and they're saying like, wow, a lot of our incident data has to do with student versus adult conflict, not student versus student conflict. And then, so how do we support adults in de-escalation? How do we support adults in maybe recognizing that there might be some bias at play? And so then they actually put in like an SEL program, and the SEL program allows teachers to talk to students about how they're feeling and allows them to sort of de-escalate a situation. So it's a variety of not just disrupting and putting in place systems, but then also to talk about like how we as adults are reacting to students. Now, there are student versus student conflicts, always. A lot of those start even outside of school. And so then it becomes that those are really hard to address. But then you go back to that belonging piece. And why are there some schools where students have a better relationship with one another, and that school culture is a more peaceful, for lack of sophistication, culture, versus another school where students are so at odds with one another? Like, what are we doing to help students learn about one another, interact with one another in positive ways, and giving them opportunities to actually team build in different ways, you know? And so those are the types of things that we started to do, and we were very intentional about it. I hope that answers your question, Mr. White.
And if I
Yes,
could,
it does.
Okay,
It does. It truly does. Thank you.
of
And
course.
so for those staff that's also involved in the schools, that also helps and eliminates a lot of the negative aspect of it. Even if there's issues or problems that occur, the staff that's involved and understand the concept of the program steps in to also de-escalate situations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we started to do is language matters, and we started to really not call them like disciplining students. We started to talk about what are the behavior interventions. So we started to talk about the way that a student behaves at a school, or the way that a student presents him or herself at a school, as part of our educational responsibility also. How are you helping the students interact with adults, and how are you helping them interact with one another? That is part of the wraparound services that we should be providing all students. And what are those early indicators that a child is disengaged? If a child has been suspended out of school and they come in after being out for 3 days, they're going to feel a certain way. So how are we re-engaging them into the community? And what are the things that you can say to a student to help them feel seen and help them feel valued as a member of the community? That's really the work that we're still engaged in now. That is the belonging work. But de-escalation training and de-escalation strategies help tremendously in our schools, and that's something that we've been talking about during our safety meetings.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay.
And Mary Ann, I cut you off. I apologize.
No. The only thing I was thinking and I wanted to add is that when students also feel the strong relationships with the adults, even when they're experiencing challenges outside of the school community, they're more likely to seek support and help from the adults.
Correct.
And seek intervention. And so, when our schools have these very strong relationships with their kids, it's really a preventative measure as well, because the kids are more comfortable with sharing a problem or a challenge that they're experiencing.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. Are there any other comments or questions? If there are not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. I second it.
So we got a motion by Mr. Oliver and a second by Mr. White. And again, thank you, ladies, for that
Of
very
course.
comprehensive and robust presentation. We appreciate it, and I especially, for Mr. Oliver, since he's new, to be able to hear all of the work that has been done. I've been here long enough to know that this is a very insidious problem, and it goes back a long time. And
Yes.
so we definitely have seen improvements in these issues, and we look forward to what comes next.
We
And
do too.
meeting is adjourned at 7:11. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
night.
Have a good night. Thank
Have a good
you.
evening.